If you take anything away from this reflection, today's episode, it's to value a role model in your life, an ideal, an embodied ideal.
We back, party people.
Yeah! With another reflection on the Daily V. And today's reflection, it is on the heels of an amazing conversation I got to have with this renowned cognitive scientist, psychologist, philosopher, John Vervaeke, who we did a podcast episode on the Magic Minds podcast, my beverage company, Magic Mind. We did a podcast episode and live conversation with him here in Venice recently, and I think it'll go out in about a week or so. The conversation with Dr. Vervaeke was fascinating from so many different angles, mapping and overlapping what the best of philosophy, the best of psychology, and the best of cognitive science have to say about meaning, purpose, fulfillment. But one of the things that was worth calling out that I've reflected on over the last few days, it's worth creating an entire episode for Daily Vedantic around something that he touched on that the latest and greatest within cognitive science has started to highlight. And that is the value of a role model. Specifically, and you can listen to the conversation that I had with him in long form, but specifically, he said that in recent years, cognitive science has borne out that the single biggest predictor of success, individuals that list out their goals and then achieve them, out of all of the different variables that they've studied. He and his team hypothesized this about a decade ago, and then it was actually one of his colleagues that what used to be his TA and his assistant now is a tenured professor. His colleague did the work to study this, the different variables that they tracked. And this was a few years ago that the research came out, this large-scale study, said that role models, people having role models, was the biggest predictor of them achieving their goals. It's not intelligence. It wasn't work ethic. It wasn't cultural background. It was whether they prioritized having a role model or not. This didn't need to be an in-person role model. It didn't need to be a mentor that they could grab coffee with. It could have been MLK Jr. It could have been Steve Jobs. It could have been Vivekananda. It could have been Gandhi. But having a role model, that ended up being the biggest predictor of an individual achieving their goals. John and I were talking about this after the conversation, and he said the role model could be a parent, could be your father or mother. But he said, what a disappointment it is when you ask people who their role models are, and their only answer is a father or mother. It's better than nothing. But he said, out of anyone you could choose throughout human history, if you go for your father or mother, how much of that is you choosing or how much of that is just you settling? I mentioned to him that, this ties really closely to the value of a guru. It's always struck me as somewhat odd. At least the first few years that I heard this, it was somewhat odd that within the philosophy of Vedanta, there's this phrase, forgotten guru. And you'd use this phrase in appreciation and devotion, kind of an offhand comment. Forgotten guru. You do this, forgotten guru. And it struck me as so odd in the first few years that I heard this phrase, because I was like, you can't put a guru on par with God. Even if they are a realized soul, I mean, come on, there's a difference between the unmanifest supreme and the manifest being that you visualize when you think of the guru. It took me, like I said, several years to see the insane benefit, the incalculable benefit of the guru, the bridge between the manifest and unmanifest, the bridge between hearing, listening, contemplating, wisdom and someone embodying it that you can witness. The bridge between text on a page and a 360-degree walking embodiment of that wisdom. That's the value of a guru, is the term is dispeller of darkness. But more classically speaking, guru has two core qualities to be a real guru. Now, I'm not talking about guru disease, someone that thinks they're a guru, someone that has a yoga guru at their local hatha yoga spot. I'm not talking about, a marketing guru that you hire for a company that you're running. The actual classical definition of a dispeller of darkness, an illuminator, is someone that is both realized and established in the wisdom. Because you could have someone that's realized, but they got instantly realized through an experience in their life at 18, and they aren't really established in the wisdom. They got the message, but they don't necessarily have the equipment to convey the method. That is, human history is filled with examples like that. To be a guru, to be a dispeller of darkness for others, you have to have not only got the message, but the classical definition is that you also can impart the methodology for others to get it as well. It is so rare to find a guru. I remember thinking a few years into pursuing philosophy more and more, just almost like a light, whimsical wish. Man, I wish I could find a guru. All these great titans, they had gurus that I'm reading, that I'm loving reading. They all had gurus. Now, it's very true, similar to the study that John and I were talking about. You don't have to physically have a interaction or relationship in person with that guru. In fact, Swami Parthasarathi, our guru, and more on that term in a second, he is his favorite guru of the galaxy of sages and saints was a guy that died in 1903, Ramatirtha, that he never met. So you absolutely can tap into wisdom from someone from afar. But if you have the chance, if you're 24 episodes into the Daily Vedantic, and maybe you've taken me up on buying Vedantic treatise, and you get half of the way through that, and you're like, man, that James guy keeps talking about how rare it is that a guru exists in our time, how even more rare is for you to be able to save up, and it's a pretty penny, but save up and buy a ticket to go visit that teacher to even assess if they are worthy of a title like guru. It is so crazy rare, and he's 97 years old, that even if it's just 5 days of your life to go see if there is a there, maybe it's worth it, because fast forward a few months, year or two, and maybe the opportunity is gone. And whether you take my word for it or not, you will hear over and over and over again from nearly every major tradition that those individuals are exceptionally rare. But the last thing I talked to John on this topic around was telling him that role of the guru, the invaluable role of the guru. But we also talked about how that term has been so misused and abused by those not fit for that term, for that title, that ruin that title when we hear guru. It's such a pejorative term in the West. But I told him, this is, I guess, 4 days ago, after sleeping on it for one night, 2 nights, and thinking about what he's saying of the invaluable role of a role model in the paramount nature of a guru when it comes to philosophical wisdom, and how those two are severed by this pejorative term, guru, that just doesn't feel right, feels off to use in the West. And after thinking about it for a day or two, I was like, F that, I'm going to start to bring that term back. Because without something that makes it paramount, people will settle. Steve Jobs had a guru. People are settling for Steve Jobs to be their guru when Steve himself had a guru because of his own shortcomings that he was well aware of. Why walk around with a carbon copy if you could walk around with the ideal in our heads? Why walk around with a carbon copy of an ideal in our heads versus the real thing? It's the same for so many of the titans throughout Western history that I have loved. And then when I realized all of these mofos love Vedanta, why don't I go to the real thing? Whether it was Emerson, Thoreau, Carl Jung, Alan Watts, Aldous Huxley, T.S. Eliot. It's like, why don't I go to the real thing and start reading these Upanishads that these mofos love so much? And that switch has taken these two-dimensional ideas and given them 3 dimensions of proportion in my mind. Similarly, I think the biggest risk when it comes to having a role model is settling for someone undeserving of that title, someone that represents a fraction of the ideal that we are capable of shooting for. So if you take anything away from this reflection, today's episode, it's to value a role model in your life, an ideal, an embodied ideal. If you can, choose the highest embodied ideal possible. And your entire world might reorient itself around you. That is the promise, the classical promise of a guru. And as weird, pejorative, misinterpreted that term might be, if you brush away the dust, dirt, the mud that might accumulate around a term like that in your own head, I'm not saying you need to use it externally, but internally, if you polish that term to what it's meant to be, dispeller of darkness, a realized soul that has seen the culmination of knowledge and one that is established in the wisdom, received the message, and can impart the method. It is hard to contemplate a higher embodied ideal than that, at least for my money. And that is today's reflection on the daily Vedantic. If you don't have a role model, highly suggest you find yourself one. And in that search, or if you have one that you know is decent, but you might be settling on, aim for the highest possible embodied ideal you can. Pressure test it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take their word for it. To find a guru, it's 1% faith, 99% corroboratory evidence. Meaning that your favorite restaurant, you don't just go to it out of faith, blind faith, over and over again. Maybe in the very beginning, a friend recommended it. But you know how faulty that can be at times. After a while, you're going there after the first time. You're going there because you yourself have experienced it. That should be the same with gurus. 1%, a nudge from someone else, from someone else's viewpoint, 99% corroboratory evidence that they live the life that you would want to live, that they embody the virtues that you would want to embody. And if that corroboratory evidence takes you to a conclusion that they have what you want, well then, maybe that can be the biggest predictor of you yourself getting it. We'll see you next time.